He would ask people to do something that's seemingly impossible, even if they don't know how the heck they were going to do it.
Walt Disney was somebody who came from nothing. The Walt Disney Company started in a single car garage. That's where it started. He always was looking forward and always wanting to try new things. Sometimes you have to believe so much in what you want to do. You have to believe in your gut that this is the thing I want. Even though it doesn't exist, I'm going to do it. He saw in artists that were working for him things that the artists didn't even see in themselves. He was a visionary. Walt's attitude was, isn't it fun to do the impossible? Meaning that maybe it is impossible to do that right now, but you can figure out how to do it. And I would say to you that we all have visions, and it's about following through.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. In The Nomadic Soul, each chapter opens with case studies of 6 well-known figures from modern history who, I believe, lived with fully expressed nomadic souls. They were people of substance and character, with a strong sense of morals and ethics. They were driven by a strong mission to help the world through their contributions. So, for the next 6 episodes, I'll speak to experts and biographers of these individuals. Together, we'll distill the wisdom and lessons from their unique life stories and inspire you to reach your full potential. I hope you'll embark on this journey with me because you just might discover valuable insights to take your life to the next level. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoy this episode. An intense curiosity transformed Walt Disney from a bankrupt high school dropout to a pioneer in the American animation industry. Undoubtedly, there were several vital ingredients that made him an unprecedented success. But what fueled him was his curiosity. From his humble beginnings as a young boy in Kansas to his last days as a thriving entrepreneur in animation and entertainment, Walt displayed an insatiable desire to learn, explore possibilities, and put his knowledge to use. To tell us more about Walt's inspirational story, I invited David Bossert, an award-winning artist, filmmaker, and author. He was a longtime animator at Walt Disney Animation Studios, who worked on iconic films such as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Nightmare Before Christmas. David and I will explore the different facets of Walt's career and how his natural instinct to question, innovate, and explore led to his unprecedented success, which has touched millions of lives around the world. I hope that listening to the Walt Disney story will jumpstart your curiosity and drive to create a magical life. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Great, Celine. It's great to be back and chatting with you.
Yeah, I know. How have you been since the last time we talked?
I've been doing very well. I've been very, very busy. As you know, I've published quite a number of books. In fact, my 13th book is coming out in September. So I've just been crazy busy.
Oh, wow. Your 13th book.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very, it's interesting when, I never thought that I would have written a book, let alone 13 books. And it's something that I've really spent time thinking about because so often people will say, "Oh, someday I'm going to do that," or "I'd like to do that," or, "I wish I could do that." And I, had somebody suggest to me for my first book, which was on Roy E. Disney, to put a collection of stories together about
Mhm.
him. And I thought about that suggestion and I said, well, I've never written a book. How do I do that? And I went and found out how to do it and I did it, and I look back at that first book now and go, wow, at some point I'm going to rewrite that book because I think I'm a better writer now. But
Sure.
I created a book, and that just was there was a domino effect after that because, instead of wishing or thinking that someday, there is no someday, by the way. There's Monday, Tuesday,
Hmm.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but there's no someday in the week. Someday never comes because when you say that, you're just pushing it off and you'll never do it. And I choose to do things when I think about them and say, I want to do that. And I go and do it.
Hmm. Yeah, because time is precious, right? You got to
It
make the best
really
use
is.
every
It,
day.
you absolutely do. And you have to put yourself out there and you have to
Mhm.
be okay with failing. And you have to be, you have to learn from those failures. Failure's part of growing. So when
Yeah.
you talk when you talk to highly creative people and
Yeah.
inventors and stuff like that, they talk about the failures, because the failures are stepping stones. They're your ability to learn.
Speaking like a true Disney alumni, I see.
Exactly.
And I want to let our listeners and viewers know that David and I have had a conversation before, and you can look at our archive and check it out. We talked extensively about creativity and how his career influenced his whole approach actually towards his art. So definitely go and check that out. I'll add the link in the show notes so you can go and find it easily. And David, you briefly mentioned Roy E. Disney and how he encouraged you to write your first book. I know that you're fairly well acquainted with him. And for those who don't know, Roy E. Disney is Walt Disney's nephew. And I'd love to know if he shared any interesting anecdotes or stories about his uncle that really, stuck with you.
Yeah, no, he and I actually became friends, and I traveled with him and had dinners with him, just he and I together, and he told me many stories. He told me a great story of his uncle Walt coming over when he was just a child. I think he said he was like 6 or 7 years old. He was sick in bed, and Walt came over to the house and sat on the edge of the bed and told him the story he was going to do of Pinocchio. And he pitched the whole Pinocchio film that Walt was going to do to Roy while he was sick in bed. And I sit there and when I hear those kinds of stories, you can't help but start to think about a highly creative person whose mind is always going. And I often tell people who say to me, how do you do so much stuff, and how are you doing all of this? And for me, you know, I don't work 9 to 5. I like to say I work 5 to 9, because I'm up o'clock morning. And I'm in my office usually by 5:30, 5:45. And I'm excited every day when I get up, So, creative people are on all the time. and I sit and I could show you this, Celine, because I have it sitting right here. I have
Mm.
this cheap college ruled notebook.
Okay.
I fill these. I write in these every day. I write down ideas. I write down how I'm feeling, what I'm doing that day, important things that have happened. I'm journaling every day for some amount of time. And I have a shelf in my office that's half full of filled notebooks, and those are the ones that I just have in my office because I have stuff from over the years that I have in other cabinets and in boxes and things like that. And so for me, when it comes to creativity, you're always on, you're always thinking, even when you're sleeping, I oftentimes will think about a problem or something I'm working on right before I go to sleep. And it never fails. The next day when I get up, I have some kind of a solution to it or an answer or what I'm going to do. Because your creativity is in your mind, and once you understand how creativity works, you can really harness that.
Right. And you were talking about maintaining a journal and writing notes early in the morning. Is that similar to the morning pages
No,
that
I don't necessarily do it always in the morning. I
okay.
do it when I do it at different times.
Okay.
If I have 15 or 20 minutes in the afternoon, I pull my notebook, I open it up, I jot a couple of paragraphs down and put it back on my desk. So I don't just do it every morning or every afternoon. I do it kind of throughout the day. And it's part of my life. And I travel with that notebook. And by the way, I do want your listeners to know you don't need a fancy journal. You don't need to go and buy some, fancy leather bound, journal with a lock on it or something like that.
Mhm.
And I usually buy them, six at a time. And, they're like $1 a piece, or just an inexpensive notebook. And
Mhm.
that's all you really need,
Right.
And for me, writing longhand, actually writing in cursive longhand in a notebook actually helps your creativity. It makes you think. You're not just typing on a keyboard and letting spell check fix things,
Yeah. You get
or
out of the logical mind and get into your
yeah, you
the
get into your
you
creative mind. You're
right.
thinking about the words you're going to put down, the actual tactile experience of writing, with the pen or the pencil going across the paper. You can actually hear it when you're sitting in a quiet space. You can hear the pen or pencil going across the paper. You're thinking about what you're putting down, because you can't just backspace or delete like you do on a Word document. You're actually thinking about the words you're putting down. And to me, years ago, I do an annual personal, we'll talk about this later, but for me, during that personal retreat, I oftentimes write lists out of things I want to accomplish in the coming year. And I remember when I wrote that first book on Roy E. Disney, I went off on my personal retreat up to Maine, the state of Maine in the U.S., and I sat at an old picnic table by myself with a notebook, and I just stared out at the water. It was quiet, birds were chirping, you heard the clanging of the halyards on a mast in the distance, and it was just complete solitude. And I just let my mind go. And I thought to myself, well, I did this one book. What other books could I write? And I just started writing a list. And I put down what I thought a title would be, and then a sentence or two. And I wrote out this list. And believe it or not, I go back to that list on a yearly basis, and I've crossed off a lot of those books now because I've actually done them. It wasn't a wish list. It was a list of things. This is what I'm going to do. And that's the mindset that I'm always in.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And as you were speaking, I was wondering if you think that at the heart of all this, at the heart of every creative person like yourself, is an inner curiosity that seems to be quite insatiable, right? And I know that this is something that Walt Disney was known for. I mean, he was known for a lot of great qualities and traits, but one that really stood out was his insatiable sense of curiosity. And I was wondering, was this a value that was showcased while you were working for the Walt Disney Company? And if that is the case, how did they encourage it in you?
You know, I don't think that that's something that's teachable. Okay. I think you develop that on your own. I have a natural curiosity. I read a lot on lots of different subjects. And when I meet interesting people and meet new people, I want to know what they do. And if they're doing something that is, I I'm interested in, I pepper them with questions. How does that work? How does this work? How do you do that? What happens when this happens? That's part of the learning process. And for me, I've told people when I've gone out to speak at schools, students and things like that, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to have that curiosity. You have to be looking and reading and finding out new things and trying new things because all of that goes into your creative process. Part of being creative, having a creative mind, is where you're taking these little crumbs of information that are floating around. I like to tell people all these little crumbs and facts and things are bouncing off the inside of my head, and you start to connect dots. I when I go up to Maine every year, there's a little seasonal school up there that I typically take a class at, a week-long class. And one year I made a pair of oars out of wood, right? So for scratch, I made a pair of oars. I don't own a boat, but I made a pair of oars because I was interested in understanding how to do that. And that in and of itself allows your mind to understand how things are made. And you can look at other things throughout your year, throughout your life, and say, oh, I wonder if they do it this way or that way. You have a better understanding of how things are done. And that in itself feeds into other things that you're going to be doing from a creative standpoint. I know that, some people may be scratching their head saying, I don't get it, but for me, being able to learn new things on a regular basis keeps your mind very active and keeps you very curious.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think it's getting more challenging to do these days because of the overstimulation that we're having from our environment, from our smartphones to the internet, social media. We're just so distracted that we don't have that mental space to actually just let our mind wander and quench our thirst for learning more. What is your
You,
advice for people who are struggling with that?
you have to make the time. Every year for 2 weeks, I go up to Maine for 2 weeks by myself. The first week, I'll take a class in something I haven't done before or something I have done before and I really enjoy and I want to do more of. And the second week is all about solitude. And so the way I view it and what works for me, and I think, this is something that people can adapt to, is that when I go up to Maine and take that class, that first week is a way for me to downshift, if you will, to sort of slow down from my normal life. And by the end of that week, I feel very relaxed and sort of unplugged, if you will, because I'm not on a computer all day long or going to meetings or doing phone calls or whatever. And then that second week allows me to drop down even further. And that's where you get into the solitude, being able to be in your head, unplugged from all the electronic devices and everything you're being
Yeah,
bombarded
because it
with.
takes time, right, to
Yeah,
get.
and
Yeah.
where I go is very remote, so there's really not a lot of people around. So I get to easily be by myself. And the thing I would say to people is you could do that on a weekend. You could go off, go out of the city. Maybe it's an hour drive, or maybe you have to take a train someplace or a bus. But you can go someplace and find a little bit of solitude where you could just be in your own head. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to do because we're in a world today where everybody has to be connected and they have to be checking, and did I get any Facebook likes, did I did my friend post something on Instagram? I have to be on top of all this stuff, and you don't have to be on top of it. I don't have FOMO. I don't have the fear of missing out. Okay, so for me, I've conditioned myself to unplug from the world when I need to unplug from the world, and it's one of the healthiest things I think a person can do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And getting back to Walt Disney and
Yeah,
his innate curiosity. So I know you've written about him extensively in some of your books. And based on what you have learned from your research, what do you think are the reasons why he's so successful? Like, how has curiosity been a component, a major component in his rise to, the level of success he's reached?
I think my view of Walt Disney is that he always was looking forward and always wanting to try new things. So, in a sense, when you look at say Steamboat Willie, the first Mickey Mouse cartoon, one of the first Mickey Mouse cartoons that he did, right? Because he did three of them in 1928. He did Steamboat Willie, he did Galloping Gauchos, and he did Plane Crazy. And those three cartoons were, uh, I think crude would be a reasonable word to use from the standpoint that they were very basic animation, but he took a chance on adding sound to the Steamboat Willie cartoon, and that became a sensation. It was the first cartoon to have audio projected in a theater in 1928. And so there's a lot of firsts that he's doing. And so he was constantly pushing his artists to improve their draftsmanship and improve the art of animation. And when you get into the 1930s, he gets shown the Technicolor process of doing color, and he signs an exclusive deal with Technicolor that he would be the only animation studio to use the process for a set number of years, right? Because he's forward thinking, he's looking at new technology, and again, he's pushing the boundaries. And throughout the 1930s, you can see this improvement and refinement in the animation that's being produced at the Disney studios. And all of that was being done because he was looking forward to doing a feature film. And that feature film was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which became an absolute blowout sensation. and was one of the highest grossing movie of 1938. It was released in December of 37. And so when you study Walt's life, you see him constantly going, what's the next big thing? What is the next thing that I can do to create a great experience for people? And by the end of the 1940s, he's starting to look beyond animation and is starting to think about building a theme park. And again, he took his daughters to local amusement areas, and they were kind of dirty, and the carnival barkers and midways, and they almost were seedy. And he started thinking to himself, why can't there be this really nice clean park where people can go and sort of let loose of the daily grind and enjoy themselves, and maybe learn something at the same time, and that's sort of the genesis of him developing the idea of doing Disneyland.
Mm.
And he was somebody who put it all on the line, to get Disneyland built. He basically put everything he had into it. He cashed out insurance policies, he borrowed, he begged, he just did what he had to because he so believed in his idea. And he didn't listen to people who were saying, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or this is the way it's done. He broke the mold, he invented what we now know as a theme park. Because prior to that, there really wasn't a theme park. There was amusement parks. In fact, he wanted to build Main Street USA, which leads you into Disneyland. And he had amusement consultants telling him that he was crazy, that he needed to have a midway with carnival barkers and rigged games that took people's money. That's what he needed to do. And that's exactly what Walt didn't want to do. And he didn't listen to those people, So sometimes you have to believe so much in what you want to do. You have to believe in your gut that this is the thing I want. Even though it doesn't exist, I'm going to do it. And I often cite Steve Jobs of
Yeah,
Apple,
I see a lot of
right?
similarities between Walt
Yeah.
Disney and
So
Steve Jobs.
yeah, and if you sit there and Steve Jobs sits there, and if he went out and asked people if they wanted an iPod that had all their music digital on it, people would say, "Why would I want that? I have this whole shelf full of CDs. I don't need that." Right? And so my point being is that sometimes if you go out and ask too many people what you think of an idea, people will tell you crazy, and a lot of people sort of will be affected by that, and they'll decide, well, maybe I shouldn't do that because so many people are telling me I'm crazy. But it's all the people who decide to go off and do something because they so believe in it, and even though it hasn't been done before, they push forward. And of course, Jobs came out with the iPod, and it became an instant sensation. Right? Everybody had an iPod because you could have your entire music library on this little tiny device.
Yeah.
And now you have your whole music library on your iPhone.
Yeah, I mean, this might sound like an esoteric question, but what was it about people like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs that made them actually tap into that curiosity and actually somehow find a way to channel it in constructive ways? Because all of us are curious to a certain extent. I mean, of course, people like them are heavyweights when it comes to this, but what was it about them, and what can people glean from that?
Well, in my mind, all of them are just like you and I, except that they acted on their dreams. They acted on their
So it's
vision.
about taking
Uh,
action.
And I believe it is. I think it is about pushing forward, and actually doing something, and the people that actually do things and risk things, risk it all, to
Yeah.
do what they believe, are the ones that will succeed. Now, you could say, well, there's plenty of people who have failed. Yeah, there are plenty of people who have failed. And, Steve Jobs failed and Walt Disney failed, and any other successful entrepreneur out there has failed. You look at Elon Musk today with SpaceX, right? He's trying to build the largest, rocket, and he's failed a number of times. But some people will look at the rocket exploding as a failure, but Elon Musk doesn't look at it as necessarily a failure. It's what they learned from that particular launch. Even though the rocket exploded, they learned a whole bunch of stuff and they applied that to their next one, and they just had a successful launch of their Starship. I think that, people who push forward, Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, right? He went through thousands of materials to figure out what the right filament was going to be. How many people would do that? They might get through 10 and decide, oh, this is never going to work, but
Yeah.
I think part of the curiosity is, oh, that didn't work. Okay, I won't use that. Let me try this, and they just keep trying different materials until they finally get it. And I think to some degree you
Yeah, it's
have
about
to,
maintaining that curiosity, right? Even
yeah,
if you fail and if you keep trying
yes.
again and again, like as Thomas Edison did, he still remained curious and he still pushed through, even though he was not he was not successful several times. Actually, was it like 1,000 times that he fails?
I think it was. I think it was like. I think it was something like 3,000 times.
Yeah.
Or it was some crazy number of attempts at creating the light bulb, and I would say that it to me, you have to sit there and you have to decide, how important something is to you and what you want to accomplish, and you have to move forward on it. And look, there's a certain amount of realistic nature to it. I mean, if you have billions of dollars behind you, you have more flexibility to really
Yeah.
push something forward.
And Walt Disney
But
had his brother handling the finances and, and
that's exactly right. But you also have to realize the Walt Disney Company started in a single car garage at his Uncle Robert's house, right? That's where it started.
why do all
And
big companies start in garages? I
I
know
know, but
Apple started there.
Hewlett Packard
Yeah.
started in a
Something about
garage,
garages.
but you know what it is? It's free space.
That's true.
You're not going off and renting an office space. You're going out in your garage because you're living in a place. Jeff Bezos, started packing books in the garage of his
There
house,
you go. Yeah.
and
So
built
I guess it's
Amazon.
because there are no constraints there and you kind of have permission to just do whatever and get messy.
Well, it's all of that, and you don't have to pay rent because you already have that space, right? So oftentimes you're starting something on a shoestring, and you're trying to make something happen. And look, I firmly believe that we all have the ability to develop our creativity, and we all have the ability to be curious. We all have the ability to be positive and optimistic, but an off just into a mindset of negativity, of saying, "Oh, I can't do that," and they just have those voices in their heads that are holding them back. And really, what you need to do is you need to break free of that. And the only way you can break free of that is you yourself doing it. Instead of thinking negatively, you force yourself to think positively about things. Okay, that didn't work out.
Yeah.
What will work? Let me try something different.
Do you think it helps to be around other curious people? Because I think to some extent it is contagious. I know Walt Disney, he was always surrounding himself with, very innovative people. And yeah, what do you think? Do you think it helps to have people around you who can encourage that innate sense of curiosity?
I think absolutely you're influenced by people around you. If you surround yourself with negative people that are always complaining and moaning about stuff, then that's what you're going to be doing. But if you surround yourself with people who are curious, who are positive, who are go-getters, who want to try things, those are the people that are going to succeed, you know?
Yeah.
And again, Celine, I would say to you that we all have that within ourselves, and it's just something that you have to develop. And if you want to be successful and if you want to, develop it, you will. I remember when I was working at the studio, there was a lot of tremendously creative people, but there was also, like I can think of a small group of people who gossiped and were always
Really?
negative about things, and but those were people who never really moved up the ladder, so to speak. They sort of stayed within the area they were in because that's that was their comfort zone, you know and if you went to them and said, uh what would you like to do X, their response would be, oh, I've never done that before, I can't do that. you know and it's funny, I interviewed a number of people at the Walt Disney Company over the years, and the ones who were very successful were the ones who always said yes. So if somebody came to you, and I did this, I mean, if somebody came to me and said, hey, Dave, can you do X, Y, and Z? I would sit there and go, oh, absolutely, yes, I'll do that, and then when they left my office, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to figure out how to do that. I don't know how to do that. I got to figure it out, and you went and did it. And some of it was trial and error, some of it was experimentation, but you ultimately did what you needed to do,
Yeah.
and that contributes to your success.
Hey everyone, are you enjoying Walt Disney's story so far? Be sure to read the rest of his story in depth in my new book, The Nomadic Soul, and be inspired by the life of the other 5 nomadic souls I've covered. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or buy a copy. I can't wait to take you on this profound journey. Yeah. I remember reading something about Walt Disney whenever he was trying something new, whether it's in the theme parks or in the studio, he would ask people to do something that seems seemingly impossible. And they would say yes, we'll do it, even if they don't know how the heck they were going to do it, because you just don't say no to Walt Disney. Yeah, you have to figure it out somehow and kind of deliver.
I have a great story. If you have a moment,
Please
I'll
do
tell you
share.
this. I'm going to tell you this story because it speaks to just exactly what you said. So when Walt had opened up Disneyland, he immediately started to, figure out what new attractions he wanted to put in. They were going to put in a thing called Nature's Half Acre. It was sort of based on the documentary that the studio had done, but they were doing, part of that was going to be rainbow caverns. So you went on this sort of little train that went through Nature's Half Acre, and that they had created, and then you went inside a mountain they built, and it was the Rainbow Caverns. And inside Rainbow Caverns, they were going to have different colored neon waterfalls, right? So they were using black light and dyes that had phosphorus in them. And he tasked one of his artists, Claude Coates, and I wrote a book on Claude Coates. So this story is in that book. But he wanted to have the waterfall have different colors come down into a pool. And how do you keep the colors separated? Because if they mix, it becomes, brown. It's like, it just, you lose the color, right? It's like if you took a bunch of different colors of paint and you'd get this sort of, muddy brown color, right? So he said to Claude, I want to do this. So Claude went off to try and figure out how to do it. And he was struggling because how do you keep these colors, this colored water separated so it doesn't mix? And at the time, there was a rocket scientist named Hans Haber who was consulting on some other projects at the studio. And Claude was talking to him and was telling him what he was trying to do. And Hans Haber said to Claude, "That's statistically impossible to do." So Claude was going down the hall one day and Walt was coming towards him, and they stopped and talked in the hall. And Claude said, Walt, Hans Haber said that this is statistically impossible to do. And Walt looked at him, and this is where this quote comes from. Walt looks at him and says, "Claude, isn't it fun to do the impossible?" And then walked off, right? So that was Walt's way of saying, go figure it out. And ultimately Claude did figure it out by using dividers that had hog's hair attached to the tops of them to catch any splashing that was happening. And they were able to figure it out, and it was a wonderful attraction that wowed the guests. But it was all trial and error and trying different ways to figure it out. But Walt's attitude was, isn't it fun to do the impossible? Meaning that maybe it is impossible to do that right now, but you can figure out how to do it, and that's what goes on all the time at all these great companies all over the world.
Yeah.
People are figuring things out and doing things that may seem impossible, but they're doing them, I mean,
Oh,
how did we get from a big catheter ray tube television to these skinny little flat panels? Trial
and
and error.
within a pretty short span of time. I mean, compared to
Exactly.
how long human beings have existed, it's
Yeah.
it's a very short period of time.
Yeah.
He kept sending his artists for training and trying to update their skills and keep them abreast of the newest technology. And that was super important to him.
Absolutely. And again, I'll give you another example that's related to the Walt Disney Company. I was in the animation department. I first started there in 1984. And, we were doing all hand-drawn animation, and it was all basically analog. We were putting artwork under a camera and exposing each frame of film.
You worked on
Well,
some masterpieces, huh? The Lion
yes,
King,
yeah,
The Little Mermaid.
but as we move forward, technology started coming in, and those of us who embraced the digital technology as tools we could use for creating what we do are the ones who stayed and lasted. And there was a faction of artists who wanted nothing to do with any of that. They just wanted to draw with pencil on paper. And I think it was around 2002, 2003, there was a massive layoff of a lot of those artists, and they were lost. I remember seeing colleagues crying in the hallways when they got laid off because they didn't know what they were going to do, because they were in this little comfort zone and they didn't want to step outside of it. So they had blinders on that wouldn't allow them to see what they could do. It was only that they couldn't do what they were doing anymore, you know? And that I think it's part of human nature that, but I really have been an advocate to try and, inspire people to understand that you're completely in control of where you want to be. You're completely in control of what you want to do. And, regardless of whatever your situation is, you can get out of that and do other things. There's countless stories, and Celine, I'm sure you've heard many of them, of people who have, immigrated to another country, had nothing, showed up with, $10 in their pocket or less, and built massive fortunes and were highly successful. And that will always be the case. That's always going to happen. I mean, there's people who, I know of an actor who was a boat person from Vietnam. He was fleeing Vietnam as a child, who's become a successful actor in
Would
the
we know who he
US.
is?
Yeah. I can't remember his name off the top of my
Is
head,
he
but
is he
he was the
did
little
he
boy
play the
that
little
was.
kid in Indiana Jones, The Temple of
Yes,
Doom?
yeah,
The one
him,
who
and
he won an Oscar, I think 2 years ago.
last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's
again,
that's an extraordinary story.
they're very inspiring
Yeah.
stories because there's so many people who have, come from nothing and created something.
Yeah.
And again, Walt Disney was somebody who came from nothing, and Steve Jobs was somebody who came from nothing. And there's so many others, and they
Yeah.
have been able to have great success.
Yeah, I often wonder, like, what would Walt Disney do with all the technology we have today with AI and oh my goodness, he would go crazy.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
it's interesting. He was always curious and he was always embracing all of that new stuff that was coming along. When he was building Disneyland, he was for the years leading into that, he was collecting little mechanical figures.
Yeah, the
You know,
animatronics.
well, no, these were actually little mechanical wind-up figures that did all kinds of things. A lot of them he picked up in Europe, and the curiosity of being able to look at that and say, how could we make something bigger? And, fed into the development of the audio animatronics at the company, and also, all of the mechanical birds that are in the tiki room at Disneyland, right? So, you've got somebody who's looking at this little thing and saying, wow, what if we took this and scaled it up and made something bigger, you know? And he gave it to people and said, go figure that out. So I think Walt Disney was a great casting director because he saw in artists that were working for him things that the artists didn't even see in themselves. And he would put artists together that you would think, I don't know if those guys are going to work together, but they wind up working together and creating something great. And I think that to me is what's so great about getting up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning and just being excited about what's coming down the line here, what's coming down. What can I do to, what's going to inspire me today, what's going to spark an idea,
And where does
all
that
of
come
those
from?
things.
Where does that come from? Because there are people who are feeling jaded and who are they feel limited by their circumstances. So how do they get back that childlike sense of wonder that really is that is what really drives that curiosity that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's a mindset. I think you have to develop that kind of a mindset.
Yeah. Do you have any tips?
You have to catch yourself saying, why am I being negative? Why am I being down on that? Or look at my situation. Well, yeah, okay, look at your situation, but how are you going to improve that situation? How can you improve it? And the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of people today who are into instant gratification. They want something now. They don't want to wait for it. And I'm somebody who will put off things that I don't necessarily need in order to focus on the things that I want to do and get done. And you have to develop that kind of a mindset for yourself. You have to say, I have to have the discipline to sit at my desk and write that book. I can't be distracted by, going out and jumping in the pool or, going off and having drinks with friends because I have to get this thing done. And so for me, I prioritize what I do in my life. And I can only tell you what I do and
Yeah.
how I accomplish things, but it is, I firmly believe it's all in our control. There's
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people who will sit in the corner and say, well, they didn't give me the opportunity and that person, hurt my feelings and, all of those things. But it's
So
really up to
developing
you
that
to,
growth mindset,
you
really.
you really have to develop that
Hmm.
mindset of being
Yeah.
optimistic, of being
Yeah.
positive, of learning new things, of following through and not just wishing things, wishing that you could do something or waiting for someday, as I said earlier. None of those things, they're just a waste of your time because they're not going to happen. They're
Yeah.
excuses for you to not to do something.
And what inspires you as an artist, David?
Well, for me, I'm always inspired by nature. I'm inspired by new things that are coming along that are of interest to me. I get inspired every day just by getting up and looking out the window. And I tend to notice those things that a lot of people don't notice, you know. Um, I'm curious, to stand there and watch a bird, hopping around on a shrub or a bush or looking at a squirrel that's running along the top of my fence, in the backyard.
Yeah.
Every single day there is stuff that is happening, that I get inspired by and I'm curious about. And I may read something in the paper or see an article online, and I won't sit there and go, "Oh, I'd like to know more about that." I'll immediately go see, is there a book on that? Or can I see a YouTube video of how that, of that, a demonstration of that? I sometimes get lost in doing those things, but it's very satisfying because you're gleaning little bits of knowledge. I once was working on a book. I had a book come out last year called Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas Visual Companion. And while I was writing that book, I kind of sat back and was rereading a paragraph, and then I started looking at this desk I'm sitting at, and I'm working on I'm as I talk to you, Celine, I'm sitting at a 1939 Kem Weber designed animation desk that was built for the Disney Studios. And the studio was kind enough to give me my desk when I left, and I write my books on this desk. So I've been working on this desk for more than 30 years.
Wow.
And I looked at this desk and I thought to myself, I wonder if anybody's written anything about this desk, about this furniture. And I wound up spending the rest of the afternoon doing research. And I found out that there really wasn't any definitive book on the Kem Weber furniture. He designed 22 pieces of furniture specifically for the Disney animation process, and I thought it needed to be documented. And I wound up writing a book on that after I finished my Nightmare book. And so that's kind of my thought process. These
Yeah.
things pop up one day, and it's not about, oh, that would be nice to do someday. It's about, oh, I'm going to do that. It hasn't been done. I'm going to do it. And I
Yeah.
go and do it. I follow through. So that's a big part of it, is following through.
Rather than just thinking of all the limitations and all the hows, you just go for it, right? You just like take the first step and then the next and the next, and you just kind of push yourself to.
And that's exactly how I research books.
Yeah.
right? Because I start looking into something. So let's take the Kem Weber furniture. I started looking into that, and I
Hmm.
realized there is no book that talks
Yeah.
about this furniture. I know a lot of artists from the studio who worked on this furniture in all the different disciplines. So I can interview those people to talk about what it was about the furniture and the desk that they were using that made their particular job, whether they're a layout
Yeah.
artist or a background painter or an animator, how that furniture helped them create what they were creating. And each little crumb of information leads you to another crumb of information. And I eventually found Kem Weber's archive. He had donated it to a university. And then I reached out to the university's museum, and the archivist came back to me. Oh, yes, we have all of this stuff. Oh, can I come see it? Yeah. Oh, yes. And we set up an
So one thing led
appointment,
to another.
and I
Yeah.
drove out to this university and spent the night in, at a hotel, and I went and looked at all the material,
Yeah.
and it's like one thing leads to another, and you just do it, and
Yeah.
that's what I love about the Nike, the Nike slogan: "Just do it."
Just
Go
do
out
it.
there and
Yeah.
do it,
And it sounds like there's an intrinsic motivation that's driving all of this. And somewhere within you, there is a sense of passion, right? You are passionate about these subjects. So how would people get in touch with that passion and in a way that would actually push them to take action? Because I think that's what's really missing. People are not motivated enough to actually explore and really excavate that curious drive that's within them.
I think that we all are passionate about certain things. Somebody may be passionate about everything to do with Star Wars, or they may be passionate about comic books, but how do you harness that passion to do something with it that
Yeah.
you love doing, right?
Yeah, because we'd be more
So,
we'd be more motivated about the things we are passionate about, right? We would be more
sure.
curious about them.
Yeah.
So
And for me, I'm passionate about documenting history and documenting things that haven't been documented before, right? Like, I'm not going to write a book on Pinocchio. I already know that, right? Because there's multiple books about Pinocchio, about Disney's Pinocchio, right? So why would what am I going to bring to the table? It's been done. It's been rehashed multiple times. But will I write a book about a different subject that hasn't been touched? In this case, the Kem Weber animation furniture. No one ever bothered to do that. I wrote, it's the definitive book on the Kem Weber animation furniture. And now I have people reaching out to me on a regular basis from museums, from auction houses, asking me questions and my opinion, and how do I discern this, or how
yeah.
do I know
So
it's
you found an
authentic, and all of
untapped
that.
niche.
Exactly. And you need to go do that. There's so many things out in the world that will ignite somebody's passion if they just look for it and say, gosh, you know what? That thing needs to be fixed. I need to go fix that. I need to go invent that, because, and that happens every single day. There's people inventing things, right? So you have to go off and and decide that something you want to do, you're going to go do. And it could be the simplest idea, but maybe it hasn't been done, and you go do it. One of the things I occasionally watch is Shark Tank. You're familiar with
Oh,
that
yep, of
program,
course.
right?
Yes.
So Shark Tank, entrepreneurs come in and pitch ideas because they're looking for, financial backing. And there's some very simple ideas that have been pitched on that are, when you see it, you go, wow, that's so great. I can't believe they came up with that, and that particular person who's pitching the idea saw that and said, I have to do that. And they went and did it, and they figured it out. You don't have to know anything. In fact, I will say ignorance is bliss, because if you do know too much, about what you want to do, it may turn you off and say, "Oh gosh, I can't
That's
do that."
true.
But going down the road of figuring it out and discovering how to do it you just get invested in it and you just go do it, you know? Now, look, not everybody is going to sit there and say, "Oh, I have a great idea to build a new," you know, you need billions of dollars to try and put together a factory that's going to manufacture a car, and you don't even know if it's going to sell, you know? But you know, Elon Musk did it, you know, Henry Ford did it, other people have done it, but you know, there are certain things where there's a barrier to entry. You know, you're not just going to decide I'm going to build a new airline, you know, if you've got $100 in your pocket. It's just, you know, those things are a bit insurmountable. But there are ways for you to, if your passion is trying to, you know, get involved with creating the next generation of airlines, you know, then maybe you have an engineering background and maybe that's where you want to go develop your talents, right? And you spend time working at a major, you know, aircraft manufacturing company and maybe eventually break off to do your own thing. But, you know, again, these are things that people have to look at and decide, this is my life's passion. This is my life's work. This is what I'm going to do to make the world a better place. And again, it all boils down to the mindset and what it is you want to accomplish in your life. And if you're just going to sit in the corner or go down to you know, a counter or a bar and complain about how terrible things are and how you could make it better if you only had the chance, you're never going to do it. You know, I mean, Walt
Absolutely.
Disney, you know, Walt Disney had a big success with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit in 1927 and 1928, but he didn't own the character. And this was a life lesson for him. He learned it the hard way. He thought he owned the character because he created it, but he did not own the character. And he lost the contract, and it forced him to create Mickey Mouse. Now, a lot of people who lost a successful character like Oswald the Lucky Rabbit might have gone down to the corner bar and sat at the bar with a drink in front of them and bitched and moaned and complained about how they got screwed over by life, right? Walt didn't do that. Walt decided, okay, I got a gut punch here. I've lost this character. What can I do? He creates Mickey Mouse with Ub Iwerks and does whatever he has to create those first three Mickey Mouse cartoons, and boom, has a massive success with Steamboat Willie,
Mm.
right? And
It seems
he
like he was
vowed,
driven by a big sense of purpose and a big why. What do you think that was for him,
well,
if you were to guess?
I think he was always interested in doing something new and something different than what was in the marketplace. And I think he was always looking forward and wanting to improve upon whatever he was doing. How could he make what he was doing better? And you see that from 1928 to 1937. You know, you see the Disney animation process develop, you know, in a short 10 years to where they're doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, right? But he that life lesson of losing the character Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and him creating Mickey, he vowed he would always own his characters going forward, and he did. And that was a major part of his success, you know. And he made other decisions along with his brother to do certain things that helped put them on a better financial footing and really made them the preeminent animation studio, right? And once he had conquered all of that, what could he branch out into? He started doing live action movies in the late 1940s. And, you know, he started developing Disneyland. And, you know, by the time he died, he had plans to do Walt Disney World and build an institute and do all of these things. He was a visionary.
Yeah.
And I would say to you that we all have visions and it's about following through.
Yeah, grounding it into reality.
Yeah. And follow, not just wishing, but doing. And that's what we all have to do, is that we get up every day and you go out there and you decide, what is it that I'm doing? And I'm going to go do it. I'm going to do the best I possibly can at that. And then, again, you set these goals for yourself. You work towards those goals, you accomplish them, you set new goals. So, and that's part of why I decided to write that new book, because it distills down what I've been doing for more
Now
than
let's
30
talk about that new
years.
book, David. So it's titled Find Your Happy Place, the 8-Step Guide to Expanding Your Creativity Through a Personal Retreat. Tell us just a little bit about it and where our listeners can purchase it.
Well, the book is going to release on September 10th. It's going to be available as a print edition, an ebook, and an audiobook, all on September 10th. So if you're anywhere in the world, you can get the e-edition through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And this is really just about a transformative journey that you can take to discover, a personal sanctuary where you can reconnect with yourself, and you can really unlock your creative potential. And again, I've been doing this, Celine, for more than 30 years. So I can sit there and say, look at my career, look at the fact that I've now published 13 books, look at the fact that I've got patents, U.S. patents for some inventions that I've done at Disney. I've worked on all of these movies. I've had, a very successful career in my mind, and I'm very proud of it. But it's like, how do you do that, right? How do we all do that individually? Well, for me, I attribute a lot of it to the fact that I have done this personal retreat on an annual basis for more than 30 years. And, for me, it's about creating a roadmap for my life. And I distilled all of that into this book that will hopefully create a roadmap for the reader or listener to adapt. Because what I've done, you could sit there and say, well, he goes for 2 weeks. I mean, he's lucky. He can do 2 weeks. Well, guess what? You could do 2 days. You could do a weekend. You could do 3 days. You could do a week. You could do 3 weeks. You could, you scale this to how you can fit it into your life. I do 2 weeks once a year. Maybe you do, 4 weekends. Every quarter you do a weekend personal retreat where you go to a local park and sit by yourself and not distracted by other people. You shut your phone off and you follow some of the steps I put in this book. And I'll tell you right now, it will enlighten you. It will inspire you, and hopefully it will propel you forward to do things.
Wow, that sounds fabulous. Thank you so much, David. I mean, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show again, and I appreciate you sharing all your amazing stories and your wisdom with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Celine. I so enjoy coming on your Dreamcatcher podcast. And, again, I appreciate you giving me the time and a moment to talk about this new book. And I'm sure you'll put the links in your show notes.
I will, absolutely. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, be sure to grab your copy of The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, at thenomadicsoulbook.com. Join me for the next episode in this special series where we'll excavate the wisdom from the story of another luminary to guide us on ways to get unstuck and move forward while discovering new vistas within ourselves.